These rocks, these caves. Where else can you shine a light where no human's been? There's nowhere else left on the planet to explore. Give me a hand.
We will find a way out.
We're running out of time.
Kill all of us!
Never give up. No matter what happens, you never, ever give up.
What I was so impressed with, other than the whole 3D aspect, which we'll get into in a second, was the film story. A lot of films like this can kind of get sluggish and kind of lose focus, and I felt like this was one film that was always about the characters in it, and that the tension was really brought about by them. How difficult was that being on set and really bringing that out of the characters day in and day out with such a small cast?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you know, the thing with a picture like this is that the technical requirements of making a picture, the logistics and all those things can easily become overwhelming, and you lose focus on what you're actually trying to achieve. And as you can imagine, shooting with all that water and shooting underwater is quite rigorous. But for me, you know, and it was always the big focus with the actors too, was to try and make sure they had their opportunity to do their work. Because I think ultimately, if the film is to have any resonance with anyone, you know, that it'll be because of the journey of the characters and people's ability to connect with the characters and go on that journey with them. You know, we always made time that, you know, in the schedule, it wasn't just all focused on putting all of your energy into doing the set pieces. You know, that there was good enough time for the actors to be given the opportunity to do a performance and get into the roles like that.
You mentioned Josh, or that the story kind of focuses in, hones in on him. What was it like in terms of casting? Because that's such an integral part to the film, is making sure that he's likable, but he's kind of got that youthful innocence about him.
Well, I mean, we cast a really wide net, you know, and we knew it was going to be a tricky character in the sense that we wanted someone who would start the film as a teenager and emerge as a man. And that was the motivation, you know. So when you've got such a strong idea in your mind, and it's a sort of a gut feeling, I think, you know, from knowing the material, what you want the character to be. It's interesting. I think it's something, this is why it's so tough being an actor, I think, because so much is out of your hands. You know, regardless of your technique and all those things, there's just a quality that you have that works with the character. And for us, you know, Reese did a test like everyone else. In fact, he did it in LA and sent that test through to us via the internet. And I saw it and kind of immediately thought, you know, this is the character. And quickly sort of sent the test to Jim and said, look, I think this is the guy. And Jim, I think, you know, almost immediately replied, said, yeah, sign this guy. So it actually happened very quickly in the end, and all based on his first audition.
Now, you filmed a lot on location in Queensland, Australia, and you're working a lot with the water, and you're, you know, very close and tight sets and whatnot. How difficult is it as a director to control that type of environment in terms of lighting and making sure that you're getting the angles that you want?
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a really tough shoot, you know, there's no doubt about it, but I think the key to doing a film like this is how you plan for it, how you prepare for it. So, firstly, you know, in terms of, say, building sets, working on locations is a different matter, but building sets for something like this, for example, the waterfall set, that waterfall set was actually used in probably about 6 or 7 different scenes outside of the waterfall. And the designer and I came up with a very, I think, clever strategy to recycle our sets and reuse them, and by redressing them and moving pieces of the set around. You design the sets in mind with what you think your coverage is going to be, what you think is visually the most exciting, and what you think you know is going to be the best sort of compromise in terms of maximising your use of the set, and then also in mind with the safety engineering aspects. You know, every one of our sets had those kinds of issues, you know, that we had to deal with because there's water in every set. Let alone, you know, working underwater. And of course, it's hugely challenging.
The film's kind of based on a true story, or I guess loosely based on a true story. And did you feel any added pressure to recreate something like that?
Well, I mean, the true story really was the starting point for what we wanted to do. I mean, our story is fictional, and really what we've tried to do is to take a whole grab bag of real events that have occurred to people and combine them into the one story to make it as hairy as possible. You know, and it's sort of over the top and as fun as possible, you know. But at the same time, Andrew, the producer, who his backstory was, when he was in 1988, he was leading a dive expedition in a cave system in the Nullarbor in Australia, and a freak storm came in and collapsed the cave, and it took 2 days for the team to make their way out of the cave. And obviously, that kind of life-threatening event, resonated with him. Many years later, finding himself working with Jim on Jim's documentaries, they were looking for a project to do together, to show off 3D in some of these environments, but to do it at a modestly priced, level. They kind of thought of the cave story and thought, okay, well, how can we extrapolate that, and actually tell a narrative story and, have actors and characters and so on and so forth,
You guys really didn't hold back in terms of making sure that it was a PG-13 movie, acceptable to wider audiences. And there's nothing overbearing in terms of why it got an R rating other than the language. But I feel like to an extent that gives it that realistic factor. It makes it much more plausible in terms of it being a real course of events and you seeing real people on the screen rather than people that have words stuck in their mouth that don't cross a certain line. Was that ever a discussion that you guys had to have on whether you were going to go for the R or whether you're going to stay for PG-13?
Very much so. That was a big discussion at the start of the picture, and we got quite a bit of pressure to think about, changing that. But ultimately, what we wanted to do with the show was to try and ground it and with real people as best we could. It's hard, with a picture like this, you kind of very quickly everyone's operating at a kind of extreme hysteria. It's certainly not the King's Speech in a cave, or whatever. There's no real time for niceties, And I think anyone, under those extreme environments, in terms of language, behaviour, what have you, is kind of more accurately depicted like what we saw in the film. Jim had a few objectives in getting involved with the picture. One is, he wanted to show off, the technical elements of the technology, delivered for a modest budget. But also, he didn't want to be encumbered by the kind of, if you like, the politics that go with trying to do major, studio sort of style pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And, so ultimately we kind of all agreed that this is the direction that we wanted to go because it wasn't, obviously we want the film to be successful and having this rating is probably going to have, some sort of commercial impact. But, that wasn't ultimately our mission. Look, if the vision for the film was a PG-13 version, then just fine. It'd be a different kind of film. I think you'd probably more go for, let's say like a 127, is that 127 hours sort of style of picture to a degree. I don't even know the rating of that film, and I haven't seen that film, so I can't comment on it. This is probably a bad example to bring up then, isn't it? but again, very specifically with Jim, the film was always going to be made in 3D. If there was no 3D, there was no film. It was as simple as that. So as soon as we had our own kind of needs and requirements to deliver a certain style of film, for a certain audience, and we sort of felt that an R rating was the best way to kind of pursue that.
This is the second film that I guess James Cameron has allowed to be used for the 3D technology that he developed and used in Avatar. What was it like, I guess, from your perspective, being able to get the opportunity to use the technology, to see it from start to finish, and to, I guess, work with Cameron just in general?
Well, working with Jim was fantastic. Obviously, I think any filmmaker, any kind of emerging filmmaker would be probably envious to be in my position in a lot of ways. Jim was very much sort of an arm's length mentor, but, I often was sort of picking up, knowledge by osmosis in a way, just by kind of being in his presence. But, he's such a considered, thoughtful storyteller. And people often think that he's driven by technology and gizmos and toys and so on, but he's not at all. It's very much about trying to tell the story as best as you can, and particularly for us in post-production, in the editing phase, when Jim was able to see versions of the film that I'd screened for him, that was the most important time for me to learn, get inside his sort of brain about how he sees storytelling, and I think I learned a lot, particularly about structure, and about one of the interesting things that happened when he saw an early version of the film was basically he said, look, it's actually too intense. You've got to give the audience an opportunity to relax and breathe. And I thought that was really interesting. So then we kind of went back and had a bit of a think about structure and a bit about sort of shot, sequence, montages, and then looked at ways of opening the picture up.
Tell me what you think about your films in 3D. 3D's kind of becoming the big thing in terms of just almost every movie being post-converted to it, filmed in it, it's being involved. What do you think in terms of it being the future of cinema in cinemas?
Look, it's interesting. There's obviously a big debate going on at the moment, and at a critical level, 3D is despised, and we're discovering that, already with this picture, that people, that there's an older generation of movie critics that just hate 3D, and they're really sort of challenging Jim and all the various other practitioners, Now, I don't quite understand why they have such a major issue with it, but they do. Now, the problem is a sort of style of experience. Now, they can also go and see the film in 2D if they choose. They're not made to watch it in 3D. Now, the big difference is this sort of post-conversion process. Now, this is the big beef that Jim has, and I get it totally, because the post-converted films that I have seen have not been very satisfying 3D. But generally speaking, most of those films I don't think have been particularly satisfying as films. So, that's a bad marriage, and unfortunately, it's a classic situation of an understandable situation, because it's the history of cinema, of an exploitation, kind of device. And look, I don't hold that against anyone. What I'm hoping, though, is that slowly we're educating people to, think about what the 3D is and what good 3D is, and really they should vote with their feet. And this is why, and this is the reason why Jim wanted to EP this, because, as I say, it's to prove a whole bunch of stuff, and it's the reason why, obviously, he's a big marketing tool for us, because we're trying to say this is quality 3D, and that's really the brand that Jim brings in terms of being associated with the picture. Is I think that people will have a sense of, okay, if Jim's going to put his name on this picture, the technical elements of the picture will be good. Even if we hate the film or hate the story or whatever, at least the technical elements are very best, world's best practice, So, now, having said all that, this year, I think we're actually going to see a lot more live action films made with a better 3D process, and usually using Jim's paste fusion techniques. Now, again, there's no guarantees. You can give someone the tool; it doesn't mean they do a good job.
Sanctum. Loved the project, and I loved making it. It was like one of the best experiences I've ever had.